Hey guys.
Hey, and let me begin to record. Yes, so this is lesson number 6 from the Introduction to Gnosis program, and it's called The Human Machine and the Pluralized I. And I'll come back to this, but I'll read this to begin. Master Samuel says, we think we are individuals when we are only machines. We never accept being treated as machines. We cannot accept that it is believed we are asleep. We feel awake, very awake, but in reality, we are asleep, right? So I put here, obviously, this picture. As I'm sure you all recognize it from the movie The Matrix, right? Because in that movie, this concept of the cave, right, of Plato's cave, which we spoke a little bit about last week, is reflected upon, right? This idea that we as individuals do not really perceive reality as it is, but we perceive reality in a conditioned way, right? We perceive reality in the way that it has been presented to us by our parents, by culture, and even beyond that, as we are exploring here, there is an esoteric reason for that, which is called the ego. And the ego is something that has been conditioning our consciousness, our essence, our spirit for millennia, for many different lifetimes. Okay, but we'll talk more about that later on when we talk about the immortality of the soul, previous lives, karma, and all of that. Okay, so for now, there is this recurrent theme in different mythologies, right? That we have to sort of liberate ourselves from from cultural conditioning to begin to see reality as it is, and that while we are perceiving reality through the ego, we are like simple machines, right? That with a particular program that and so in that sense we are manipulated. We are easily manipulated and controlled, not only by a particular system but by others, right? And so this is what we're going to explore today, and obviously how to liberate ourselves from this, right? We are not in an optimum state, right? So it shows this picture here where Neo finally sort of awakens or is unplugged from the matrix and begins to see the real world, and he sees, right, that all these human beings are plugged into a system and they are completely asleep. Their consciousness is completely asleep, and they don't realize that they're asleep and that they're dreaming, right? That system, that matrix, is symbolic of the beliefs that have been instilled in us since we were young, right? And not only in this life, but in previous existences, because we carry within us, right? As we will talk about later more in depth, we carry within us the ego through many lifetimes. And the person that we are now is not only the result of um, uh, the experiences that we've had in this existence, but also the result of many experiences from many different existences, right? And this also kind of explains a little bit why, for instance, there are obviously uh, siblings, right, that grow up in the same household, the same environment, and they're very, very different, right? They have different psychology, they have different likes, dislikes, and so forth, right? Even like twins, right, who are sort of identical physically, but they come when they come into the world, they have had different experiences, and so those experiences shape who they are to become in this life, right? And so it is a common concept in the spiritual in any spiritual tradition, right? This concept that we are asleep and we need to awaken, right? This is why, for example, in the teachings of Jesus, right, he says that we need to awake, we need to become awake, awakened. The Buddha also talks about awakening, right? And so it's this, again, they're implying that if we need to awake, it's because we're not really awake, it's because we are asleep, we're not perceiving reality properly. And so we need the proper training to begin to perceive reality and ourselves as we really are, right? And so this is why Master Samel says we feel awake, very awake, but in reality we're asleep, right? So there is this, and we'll explore in this, we'll expand on this later, but there's this this concept that just because our physical body and our eyes are open and the physical body is awake, we think that we are really awake and that we're pressing and that we are cognizant or completely aware of what's happening, right? But I'm going to test your awareness later on when we talk about the consciousness. And there's some very interesting little videos that I'm going to show you to see how aware you are in a moment, right? But let's begin from the beginning. We have obviously a human machine. We have a physical body, right? And this physical body channels at least seven main types of energy. All right, starting from the bottom, we have what are called mechanical energies, which are the energies of action. We have vital energy related to our sexual energy and related to not only our vitality, but also to our ability to reproduce, right, to create life. And these are we'll talk about this later. Also, there are many levels to this. We have then emotional energies, right? The energies of our emotions. We feel emotions. We also have thoughts, right? We think. So this human machine channels these energies related to the intellect or the mind, right? We have volitional energies related to willpower. And then we also have the energies of what are called the consciousness or the soul, and then the spirit, okay? The spirit is usually related to love, right? To the source. So these are the seven types of energies, the seven main types of energies that we channel through this physical body, okay? And so then we have also seven main centers in this human machine, right? So this responds to the question, what are we? So we have an intellectual center, we have an emotional center, we have a motor center related with movement, we have an instinctive center, and we also have a sexual center, okay? And then we have two superior centers, or we can say that the intellectual and the emotional center have a superior and an inferior aspect to them that we in Gnosis call the superior intellect and the superior emotional center, okay? So starting from the bottom, the sexual center, right, is our creative energy. We channel through that center the creative energies of our being. And also, as we will explain later on, we'll get deeper into this. This is the center related with our vital energy, okay? This is why here, when we study Kabbalah, you will notice that the sexual center is related with the Sephirah here, Sephirah called Yesod, which is the foundation stone, okay? Which is the vital energy or the vital force that gives vitality to the physical body and the rest of our being, right? So we'll get into that a little bit later, but for now, let's just say that this is the case, right? And this is why you'll see, for instance, and you see this, you see this very clearly in the in men, right? Where when after a sexual practice, right, the man expends his sexual energy, and the man is physically exhausted from this, right? And so there is a relationship between our vitality and our sexual energy, right? And women also experience this in a different way, not so much physically, but emotionally and intellectually, right? So we'll get deeper into that. And this is why, again, as I mentioned earlier in the program, we need to study tantrism. We need to study in the same way that we will study the mind and we will study our emotions, we are also going to study our sexual energy. Okay. Then we have the emotional center, which is the center in which we experience desires, we experience sentiments, emotions, feelings, and so forth, right? And we say that there is a superior and inferior aspect of this center, or we can say a positive and a negative aspect of this center, through which we experience superior emotions and inferior emotions, okay? Superior emotions are emotions related, or emotions that emanate from love, emotions like peace, serenity, bliss, kindness, right? Compassion. Those are superior types of emotions, Gnostically speaking. And the reason why they are referred to as superior is because when we are when we are experiencing those emotions, okay, we are connected with our highest essence, with our most essential essence, and with our spirit. And therefore, all actions that emanate from those emotions generally, or if they are true emotions, they create peace, harmony, and happiness in our environment. Okay, so they harmonize our environment. They allow us to feel connected with our environment. Inferior emotions, on the other hand, disconnect us from our environment and create pain and suffering in our lives. Okay, and as we'll talk about later, I'm going to prepare a class in about 2 weeks from now, where we will talk about emotional alchemy. So we'll go into this concept of emotions, because it's very, very important for us to understand our emotions. And it's something that we're not really educated on. If you pay attention, right, in school, and culture really pays more emphasis to sort of our physical body and our mind, but very little importance is given to emotions and how to use our emotions, how to train ourselves in experiencing and using our emotions, or channeling emotions, right? At least up until, I would say, I don't know, 30 years ago, right? And this is something very important, right? This is why we find ourselves now in a situation where people either suppress their we are generally suppressing most of the emotions that we feel, and especially men, right, in this culture. I think, again, we're becoming more open to this now, but up until like 20 years ago, right, 30 years ago, it was not okay for men to display any sort of emotions, right, or to be emotional, or to cry, right? I remember, when I was a little boy, my grandparents and my aunts, they say, no, boys don't cry. We're not like, again, it's like this whole idea that we don't know how to handle emotions. We don't know really the importance. And so we want to fix everything with the mind. But anyway, we'll get a little bit deeper into that later on. But emotions are very important, because emotions are what really allows us to feel connected, to feel connection, right? Aside from obviously the physical contact, the emotional bond and the emotional experience is fundamental in our in the healthy development of the human being, right? So obviously we'll expand more on that. Then we have the instinctive center, which is related to the maintenance of the organism. The health of the organism is sort of under the control of the instinctive center, and instinctive functions like breathing, temperature of your body, right? The ability to regulate the temperature of your body, nervous, the response of your nervous system, and so forth, right? Which can help us to have health or illness in the body. Okay? Then there's the center of movement. And we say that the center of that is up here at the top of the spinal column. This is why when we receive a hit to this area, we lose movement, right? So the energies of movement, which are related to habits, right? Habits that we pick up, the motor skills and all of that, okay? Then the intellectual center, which is obviously the center of thought, where we process things intellectually, okay? And then we have the superior emotional and the superior intellectual center, which help us with having transcendental ideas, sublime thoughts, and transcendental emotional experiences, okay? And we're going to focus on these later on. Right now, we're going to focus on these 5 because, as I was just explaining earlier, and we talked about this last week, in any given moment, right, we are channeling or expressing the energies of the consciousness or the ego, right? And so we say that the ego takes control of these centers. And when the ego takes control of these centers, it doesn't use those centers properly, creating disorder, chaos, and illness in the body, or all sorts of physical illnesses, emotional illnesses, and psychological illnesses are the result of the wrong use of these centers or the wrong use of these energies. Okay. And so then the physical body then is likened to a machine, right? A machine that that takes in input and expels actions, right? So we're like a machine where we receive stimuli and then the machine reacts, right, in a predetermined way, right? And so this is why I was saying before that we are like machines, because for the most part, for example, when we experience something that we are not expecting or that we don't like, then we react negatively towards that, okay? And so in this way, we can become very manipulable, right? You've all heard the expression, right? This person knows how to push my buttons, right? Where there is that one person or a few in your life, and I'm going to say everyone, really, because we're like a machine that if you press the right button, then you get the reaction that you want from us, right? And this is, you know, we call this normal, but it really isn't, because at any moment, a person that wants to get you in a negative state of being, they have the power to do so, right? They call you something that you don't like to be called, and you feel negative, right? And then you react in a negative way. Not only that, but also you see, for instance, as Master Samuel explains here, he says, like any other machine, the human machine moves in accordance with impulses of the subtle forces of nature, cosmic radiations in the first place, and the pluralized I in the second place. And the pluralized I in the second place are the secret agents that move the human machine, right? And so we have so basically nature influences who we are, right? If it's sunny outside, we're in a good mood. If it's raining, we feel sad, unless you're like my friend Colm here, who is Irish and he loves the cloudy, gloomy weather. But for the most part, right, when we are experiencing so-called bad weather, right, because we actually label weather as bad. There's no such thing as bad weather. It's just weather, right? And so we feel sad. We get into negative emotional and psychological states because our environment is triggering internal states of being, right? And so in that manner, a politician comes around and they speak and they say things, right, that you want to hear to manipulate you into voting for them, right? Or voting against the other guy, right? And they sell us many, many things that we don't need because they are able to talk to us into buying these things that we don't really need, right? Because they know that if they put a commercial on and the product that they're trying to sell is next to, for example, in the case of men, next to a beautiful woman, our our instinctive nature begins to relate this product with this sexual satisfaction, right? They did a very interesting study, which shows, right, how our instincts, our biology, and we'll say our ego conditions our experience. So they basically took a bunch of men and they brought them to into the lab, and they basically showed these men different a bunch of pictures of women that, according to the study, they were relatively around the same level of beauty, right? Like their physical appearance was similar. Okay, they were obviously good-looking women, whatever standard they were using. I'm not sure, because of course that is all kind of relative. But anyway, they actually, so they showed men all of these pictures, and then at the end of after they saw all the pictures, they were asked to put aside the ones that they found more attractive. Okay, and so then they did that, and little did they know that, hey Jalen.
Hey, Christian, how's it going?
Good to see you.
Likewise.
So in this study, these men, right, chose what they thought the women that they found most attractive, right, in those pictures. And it just so happens that they had, in those pictures, they actually had dilated the pupils of certain women in those pictures. Okay. And it turns out that the men were more attracted to the women that had their pupils dilated when they took the picture. Okay, it's very interesting. And you may ask yourself, why is that, right? And of course, scientifically, they say, well, because a woman's pupils are dilated when, for a few reasons. One of them, when they are sexually excited, and two, when they are ovulating, right? They're ovulating, so their women tend to be their pupils tend to dilate more, right? During that phase. And in general, it had to do with like sexual readiness, right? And so the interesting part about this is, I mean, that's interesting in itself, but the most interesting part is that obviously these men were not able to consciously see, those few millimeters, right? Or were not able to be aware that their pupils were dilated on these women in these pictures, right? And so the scientists concluded that it was rather sort of an instinctive response something that the instinctual center sort of picked up that went over, right, the conscious mind, right? And so there are many very interesting examples and studies in relation to this, which show us that we are in very, very little control of our actions and the choices that we make, right? And so, of course, from a spiritual perspective, we say that we are asleep, we are unconscious, we are not really aware, right, of what we're doing. And so then the question arises whenever we make a decision or we make a choice, which is also a sort of a fundamental concept in the movie The Matrix, which is why I like to put those slides there, because they have all this they explore this philosophical and psychological concepts. The question is, of course, when you make a choice in your life, who is it that's making that choice within you? Is it your true essence, or is it your conditioned essence called the ego, right? Of course, many of us make decisions based on what our parents had told us, right? Our parents and society present this world to us. And so we think that there's only there are only these options that we have. And so then we just choose among those options. And we feel that we're free because we're free to choose among different options. But we're not aware that those choices have been picked out for us. And we ignore that there are other options that we're completely unaware of. And so then the question is like, are you really free? Just because you have many choices, does that really mean that you're free, right? I don't know if you guys saw the movie Truman Show that I spoke about last week. I told you guys that was going to be your homework for this week, to watch that movie over the weekend. But if you didn't, you can watch a movie, or you might have seen The Matrix, right? Or I mean, you see this concept really in many movies, The Wizard of Oz, right? Where there's this completely new or different world that Dorothy never knew about, right? And so what the esoteric traditions are telling us is that there is this entire universe, this entire world, an aspect to your life that you're completely unaware of, and that no one even ever told you that it exists. And so it's like, again, the movie The Truman Show, where you're born into this world that has been fictitiously created for you, and you think that you're free, moving around, choosing your career, choosing the partners that choosing different partners to be with, choosing friends. And so esoterically speaking, it's important to ask ourselves, again, who is making those decisions in your life? Is it truly you, or is it your ego? And when we say ego, then we say, well, was it culture that made that decision for you? Was it your parents? Was it your teachers? And so forth, right? So it's important for us to begin to ask those questions, right? And so that's why this is a very important concept, because we are invited to really observe ourselves, right? Don't take my word for it. Don't take Master Samuel's word for it. It's important to start observing yourself and start observing your thoughts and the source of those thoughts. Where do these thoughts come from? Where do these feelings come from? Where do these instinctive cravings come from, right? And are these the only ones or the only options that I have in this moment, right? So spiritually speaking, we say, when we begin to observe ourselves like that, and we begin to open ourselves to the perspective that there's much more to life and to ourselves than what we're currently experiencing, then we begin to awaken, right? And you begin to see how there are habits in our instinctive center there are habits in our emotions, there are habits in our thoughts, right? There are people that, for instance, because of their traumatic childhood experiences, they grow and they experience the world from an unsafe place, right? And so it's very hard for them to trust people, to trust others, to be courageous, right? To take chances. And because they have this fear, right? Because they never felt safe when they were children. And so they never feel safe when they're adults, right? And this is why Master Samael recommended that we need to really change our entire educational system. We need to go through a revolution, in consciousness, because our the way that we perceive life is completely disconnected from reality. We don't have a holistic perspective of ourselves and of life. Okay. So then, this. Hello, good evening. Hello, Grace. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Christian. Thank you so much. Sorry that I'm late. I just remembered. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So we're going to get into this diagram later on when we talk about Kabbalah. But basically, from this diagram, what the Kabbalistic traditions are telling us is that the human being, or the being, right, in general, or there are many aspects to our being, right? We are not, we have our physical body. We also have sexual energy, or vital energy. We have emotions, we have a mind, we have willpower, we have consciousness, and we have an inner spirit, or an inner Buddha, right? And so there is a sort of human aspect, and then there is a divine aspect to ourselves. And we need to integrate all of this and allow, through the work on ourselves, to allow the highest energy, the highest energy or expression of being to manifest here in the world through us, by working with our mind, by working with our emotions, by working with our sexual energy, with the energies of will, our consciousness, etc. Okay. And so we must liberate ourselves from this conditioning, from the ego, and we need to begin to take control then of our centers. Okay, and we're going to focus a lot more on this in our next class, right? We need to begin to take control of our mind, of our emotions, of our motor, and instinctive and sexual behaviors. Okay. A little bit of mythology. In the story, in the Christian myth, right? There's a very interesting story where Jesus is told about this this madman, right, who is walking around the cemetery naked, scaring people, right? They say, you know, this person has gone mad, and he's in the cemetery, and he's possessed. That's the word that they use, the possessed, right? This person is possessed. He has demons within him. And so Jesus says, take me to this person, right? And when he comes face to face with this person, he confronts him and he says, who are you? And then the demons speak through him, and they say, my name is Legion, right? Very interesting. I am many, or thousands, right? And so it's a very interesting allegory that basically what the Christian scriptures were telling us, that within this individual, there were many, many demons, or many different people within, that were fighting for control over the human machine, right? And so then the story is that Jesus then prays, and then the demons are released from this being, and they come out in the form of pigs, and then the pigs run off a cliff, right? Or when the demons see Jesus, they say, "Please don't, don't harm us." And then Jesus takes those demons and sends them into the body of these pigs, and then these pigs go crazy, and then they run up the cliff. Right? There's a lot more to that we'll talk about later, so remember that story. We'll come back to it, but the main point here is that within this individual, there were many individuals, right? So this is a fundamental concept in Gnosticism, that even though we think that we're individuals, we are really not, because at any moment, right, there is someone within you fighting for control of this human machine. You may feel, for instance, and you may experience this, sometimes you have this idea in your mind, and you feel like, or you think that you need to do something, but your emotional center is telling you something else, or you feel something else, and your motor center wants to do something completely different, right? And these centers obviously sort of influence each other, and we'll talk about that next week. But we say that there's always a battle going on, right? Different egos that are trying to control the mind, others that are trying to control the emotional center, and others that are trying to control the motor, instinctive, and sexual center, right? And this is why it's hard for us sometimes to make decisions, and it's hard for us to follow, to discern which one of those voices that we're hearing inside is the correct one, right? There's the old dilemma, right, of follow your heart or follow your mind. Which one should I follow in a given moment, right? And really the question that you should be asking is, first of all, who is it that is here present within my emotional center and my mind? Is it my consciousness, or is it the ego? Because when the consciousness is present, when our true essence is present within the human machine, there's harmony and balance among the centers. They all follow the orders of the spirit. The mind, the emotions, and our motor instinctive centers are perfectly aligned, right? And as a matter of fact, whenever you actually do something, right? Well, not always, but for the most part, when you do something that you're enjoying, your mind is in it, your heart is in it, and your body is in it, right? That's what we call the balancing of the centers. And so this is why, again, another allusion here to the matrix. Master Samel says, human machines have no sense of moral responsibility. They are simple marionettes that think, feel, and act according to the kind of I that controls the capital centers of the machine in a given moment. If that I is displaced, the human marionette indeed modifies its mental and emotional processes, resulting in different and even opposite actions. The I that each human being carries within oneself is multiple. Really, it's a legion, right? And so I put the movie The Matrix here, or this scene from the movie, because it's a very interesting scene where Morpheus is telling Neo that all of these people, right, that are in the Matrix there, he says they're just going about their lives, living completely oblivious to the fact that they are in these pods, right, dreaming, right? And they're moving here, they're moved by their mind, right? Not by their true essence. And then the other thing about that is that he says those that are still plugged in the system will die to defend the system. And this is why we have people right now defending the system of the ego, right? Defending these sick laws that we have, these sick, oppressive systems of control of government, right? All for, in part, a sense of security, right? And we'll explore this concept further later on, but you know, we just saw this, right? This past 2 years were very, very interesting to analyze psychologically, right? I saw, you know, it was amazing for me to see, you know, this division in this country of the right versus the left, right? And we'll talk about this later on, but there's this concept in occult psychology, right? That what we see outside is a reflection of what we have inside of ourselves, right? And so I see myself reflected on the other, and that when I criticize another person, I'm also criticizing myself, right? And so it's very interesting for me to see, you know, how, you know, those standing for something began to stand for the opposite 6 months later, and vice versa, right? Many different examples, right? When it came to vaccines, when it came to vaccine mandates, when it came to freedoms, lockdowns, right? When it came to protests, right? All of a sudden, it's okay to protest over here for this cause, but it's not okay to protest over here for this cause, right? And all of these interesting things, right? I remember before the election, for example, the Republicans were labeled as the aggressive, violent protesters, right? Even like before, when like Hillary versus Trump, right? Labeling, you know, the left, the Democrats would label the Republicans as, you know, being part of this violent, this violent and aggressive group of or ideas. And then when Hillary lost, then the Democrats became violent and aggressive, right? And then it's like it switched around, right? Back and forth. And the group that considered themselves pro-science became very, very anti-science. They all of a sudden forgot about the science and weren't recognizing other types, you know, other research and ideas. And very interesting to see, right? To see this sort of multiplicity within individuals. And we're all guilty of that, right? And when I talk about they, I also include myself in it, right? Because I did find myself within those conflicts, right? Conflicted with these perspectives and ideas, right? And so then the question is, who are we really? What are we? And this is what we are invited to meditate on, to deeply reflect on, right? Obviously, we're not here to tell you who you are, but we're here to tell you that there are these qualities within ourselves, and that you choose, right, to explore them, and that at any moment you are feeding one or the other, right? And this is another important aspect of this. And there is you might be familiar with this story, right, that comes from the native traditions, that there are two wolves, right? The dark wolf, right? A dark or black wolf and a white wolf, right? And then there's a battle between the two. And the question is, who will win the battle? And then the wise man says, whoever you feed, right? If you feed your darkness, then your darkness will be the one that will conquer. If you feed the light within you, then it is the light that will conquer and lead your life, right? So we have this battle within ourselves, which is represented again in movies like The Matrix. You know, Neo and his posse fighting against Mr. Smith, who is opposed to the truth, who is opposed to change, right? And so we have to battle within ourselves these old ideas old concepts about who we are, about what life is, what is possible, what is not possible, and so forth, right? Okay, so that concludes our topic for tonight. Do you guys have any questions, any comments? Do you guys relate to what I'm saying? Yeah? Okay, good, good. That's important. All right.
Yes.
Yes. What's that? Oh, you were just agreeing with me?
Yes, I was just agreeing. I do relate. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Yeah. Yes, Grace. It's nice to finally meet you, by the way.
Yes, thank you. So nice to meet you, and so nice to meet all of you. And thank you so much for putting together this class. I had meant to join so much earlier, and for some reason, just it never happened except for today. So thank God I'm here and really like
Yeah.
connect with what you're saying. You know, like sometimes the inability to make decisions, you feel like you're being pulled in different directions. So that I relate to, and I also related to when you're doing something and your heart, your mind, your soul, like everything's in it. You know, then you really like connect, and you feel
Yeah.
like a sense of oneness. So I really agree with that. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad that you resonated with that. And yeah, we're gonna, when we talk about the consciousness in the next few classes, we're gonna talk a little more about that. There's this concept of the flow, which you might have heard, this concept of like being in the flow state. We in Gnosis we use the term being in a third state of consciousness. We'll talk about the different states of consciousness that we usually find ourselves with. Hello. And yeah, we are, you know, in synthesis, we are in one of those, in one of two states. We are either in a state of wakefulness or in a state of sleep. When we are in a state of wakefulness, right, we are fully present in whatever we're doing, right? And again, our mind, heart, and body are fully engaged, present with what we are doing. And usually when that happens, there is a sense of joy in what we're doing, right? We're present, we're engaged with it. And then when we are asleep, right, then there are egos in the human machine, and perhaps one ego wants to do something, another ego wants to do something else, and we end up doing things because we know that that is what we're supposed to do, but we don't feel like doing it. We're not inspired to do it. And so the question is, right, well, is there an ego in my intellectual center? Is there an ego in my emotional center? Is there an ego in my motor center? Who is right? Is any of them right? Is one of them right? Right? There are certainly things that need to be accomplished in life, right? Like, this is why I love sort of Zen Buddhism, because they make it so simple sometimes, you know. They say before illumination, chop wood, and what's it say? Sorry. Chop wood and carry water. That's what they say, right? Before you're enlightened, you have to chop wood and you have to carry water. After illumination, then you know what happens? Chop wood and you carry water. You continue to do the same thing that you did, but it is the change that has happened internally that counts, right? Because it is the person that you choose to be in this moment that really counts, right? And so in a given moment, right, in a moment of pleasure, in a moment of pain, who do you become, right? Do you become someone that in a moment of pain subsides to the pain and gives up? Or are you someone who sees the pain or the adverse circumstance as a challenge to be overcome and to grow, right? And to transform yourself, right? one of those attitudes comes from the ego and the other one comes from the consciousness. Right? And so it's important for us to, or at least what we try to do here at Gnosis, is to inspire you to connect with that aspect of yourself that we call the consciousness, so that you can begin to consciously move through life, right? As that is the goal of Gnosis, is to help us to live our lives consciously, right? Not to eliminate all pain and to just manifest beauty and pleasant circumstances, because pain and pleasure are all part of this human experience, right? And it's not in pain or in pleasure that we're going to find our true sense of being, our true sense of happiness, as we spoke about 2 classes ago, right? So this is why it's important for us to begin to learn the art of introspection, right? To begin to observe ourselves, to become aware of the totality of our being, and then begin to choose consciously who you want to be, right? Okay, beautiful. Thank you all for listening. There is a comment here. Jalen, you can relate. Awesome, I'm glad. Lena says, I like the term that Buddhists use for ego, which is psychological aggregates. Yes, because it's something we add to our true being. Yeah, and I think that's what I was trying to say, and I should have used that term. But yeah, the ego is something that attaches itself onto the consciousness like a parasite, right? It's very interesting, actually. There's another allegory that we can use, because, for instance, you know that when someone has a parasite within their body, the parasite motivates the person to eat foods that feed the parasite, and that's actually not good for their body, right? That's a perfect analogy for the ego. The ego moves us, but it moves us in a way that strengthens the ego, but kills us slowly, right? And that's why I said that the ego brings illness to the body and to the soul, right? Yeah, that's a very interesting analysis. So it is, yeah, it is. In the Buddhists use the statements psychological aggregates, right? Aggregates that attach themselves to the soul, and then the soul acts with that conditioning, right? I remember a very interesting experience that I had, just to illustrate this on a personal level. I was going through something, through an emotional, I had a difficult experience, and I was emotional about it, and I was kind of being caught up with it too much, you know, to the point where I felt that those few days I was being kind of drained, right? As you can experience, right? When you're sad, when you're depressed, you feel physically drained, right? And it was not what had happened, but it was the way that my mind was running with what had happened, right? That kept me on these states. And so one night after meditating, I go to bed and I wake up in the dream, and I'm looking at myself, and I had this big blob of something in my body, which was like a parasite. It was like a larva of some kind, right? And I remember just taking this thing off, kind of like a snail, like, you know, just gross. But it was completely attached to me, and I remember just like detaching that thing and throwing it away, and all of a sudden just feeling instantly better and light, you know, which is what I felt in meditation, because I had a comprehension in that meditation that felt liberating, you know. And after that, you know, the next day I was good, you know, and I was able to transcend that psychological state that was keeping me upset, sad, with regret, and all these mixed feelings, right? And so I found that internal experience very interesting, right? It was an illustration that my spirit was telling me, right? You know, you had this external thing conditioning you, and you were able to get rid of it, right? So I believe that it was an ego that was there, sort of sucking my energy and conditioning me, and I was able to finally liberate myself from it, through the meditation, right? And this is why, again, we teach about meditation. It's that practice that allows us to really get deep into the core essence of everything within us. So Mel asks, so if we don't get rid of the ego in this lifetime, what happens after death? Ooh, you're skipping ahead to like lesson 15 right now, Mel. But what happens is the ego continues. It continues to haunt us for lifetimes, right? Like I was saying in the beginning, you know, sometimes people are born, and from the moment they're born with particular traumas or phobias, you know, that haunt them for their entire lifetimes. The ego follows us, and so what continues after death, Master Samuel explains, is the consciousness along with the ego that it has created, right? So it's like this baggage that we carry from lifetime to lifetime. And I believe this is why we're here now in this lifetime, looking for the means to liberate ourselves from that baggage, to liberate ourselves from these psychological aggregates that are making us suffer, right? So that's why in the Buddhism tradition they talk about liberation, right? And so yes, the death of the ego is fundamental, and there are ways to do it, and we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about how well, we started talking about it now and last week, and there is a way through a deep spiritual work to actually eliminate the totality of the ego in one existence, if you really put your mind and your heart into it and your soul into it. And of course, there are the proper conditions, because we also have to consider karma, which is another element in all of this. But for the most part, we are able to eliminate the totality of the ego if we really, really yearn for it. Just like a person that is ill can heal if they really, really yearn for it, right? So, okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for your questions, your input. Really appreciate that. It only makes this conversation more interesting. So let's follow now with guided meditation to end the night. Yes? All right, wonderful. I will end the recording here.